Bradley Turner never thought the sound of a laptop fan could feel like a warning bell, but that night it did. He had settled down at the kitchen table with a half-empty coffee mug, intending to pay the overdue electric bill before heading to bed. Claire's laptop sat where she'd left it, the brushed silver lid catching the dim light above the sink. It wasn't unusual. She often forgot it there. He opened it, more out of convenience than curiosity, and typed in the password she'd given him years ago when she first set up online banking. The screen lit up, and what was supposed to be a simple login became something else entirely. A notification blinked in the corner, an unread message. He shouldn't have clicked it. He knew that. But something about the sender's name, Derek Holloway, snapped his attention like a trap closing. He clicked. First, it was just words. Harmless enough if you squinted. But then came the flood. Messages lined with emojis that made his stomach churn. Photos he never should have seen. Plans for hotel rooms wrapped in secretive language but plain enough to burn through the screen. Bradley sat frozen, his calloused hands hovering above the keys. The same hands that had fixed the fence after last winter's storm, that had held his daughter's handlebars steady when she first learned to ride, that had paid every bill for the last 20 years. Now they trembled over a truth that shattered everything they had built. He scrolled further, each word another nail in the coffin of the life he thought was his. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was worth every risk. Don't worry about him, he won't suspect. Him. That's how they wrote about him, like he was just a shadow, some obstacle to work around. Bradley clenched his jaw until it ached. The kitchen clock ticked loud in the silence. Outside, the night was still, but inside, his whole world roared. His wife of 18 years, the mother of his 2 children, wasn't just drifting away. She was gone, already living a second life with another man. He leaned back, shutting the laptop slowly, careful not to slam it even though every part of him wanted to smash it to pieces. But Bradley Turner wasn't the type to explode. Not yet. Anger boiled in him like molten steel, but it didn't spill. It hardened. He stared across the dark kitchen at the photos pinned to the fridge. Tyler at his high school football game. Sophia in her cheerleading uniform. Both grinning. Both trusting that the foundation beneath them was steady. Bradley felt something inside him twist. A vow forming without words. He couldn't let this betrayal bleed into their lives. Not yet. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Nothing would ever look the same again. Bradley turned off the laptop and slid it back to where Claire had left it, as if nothing had happened. He took a long drink of the cold coffee, bitterness coating his tongue, and stared at the ceiling. The silence of the house pressed in around him. For years, he'd believed his marriage was imperfect but steady, a partnership built on history, routines, and family. Now, with a few clicks, it felt like he'd been living in a cardboard cutout, the real story happening behind his back. He rubbed his temples and let out a breath that felt like gravel grinding in his chest. Claire had always been clever, always careful. But she had underestimated one thing. Bradley's patience was not weakness. It was strength coiled tight, and tonight she had pulled the wrong thread. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to lock the images in his mind. He would need them. He would need all of it, the names, the times, the details. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the silent alarm going off, and Bradley Turner was wide awake. The house felt different that night, like the walls knew a secret they weren't telling. Bradley moved through it slowly, his boots making soft thuds against the hardwood. He hadn't been able to sit back down after what he'd seen on Claire's laptop. The thought of crawling into bed beside her, pretending nothing had happened, was impossible. Instead, he drifted. The living room, the hallway, the kitchen again. He stopped at the stairwell, hand gripping the banister, staring upward as though he were about to climb into another man's life. He finally made his way to Tyler's room. His son, 17, was sprawled across the bed like he'd been dropped there by a wave. The boy's chest rose and fell steady, the quiet rhythm of someone with no weight on his shoulders yet. Bradley leaned against the doorway, studying him in the dim glow of a desk lamp left on. Football posters lined the walls. A pair of cleats sat abandoned in the corner. Tyler had his whole life ahead, a world waiting to be claimed. Bradley whispered to himself. Not his burden. Not yet. Next, he checked on Sophia. At 14, she still had the habit of kicking her blankets down to the foot of the bed, her legs curled tight against the night air. He stepped inside, pulled the covers back up over her, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She murmured something in her sleep, the sound soft as a memory. That was when the knife twisted. The innocence in their faces stood in brutal contrast to the ugliness he now carried. Bradley felt his anger rising again, not just at Claire and her lover, but at the idea of this secret poisoning the house, corroding the stability his kids trusted. He slipped back into the hallway and leaned against the wall, staring at the family portraits hung there. Birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings. The frozen smiles of a family that, in truth, was already fractured. He had been proud of those photos once. Now they looked like evidence in a case he didn't want to prosecute. Bradley made his way downstairs again, restless, pacing. He stopped at the kitchen table, staring at the laptop where it sat like a silent accomplice. His hand itched to open it, to dig deeper, but he resisted. He had enough proof. More scrolling through filth wouldn't change what he already knew. The clock on the wall ticked louder the longer he listened. 11 o'clock, midnight, 1 a.m. He poured himself a glass of water, but it sat untouched on the counter. The night crawled forward, each hour heavier than the last. He sank into his recliner, staring into the dark. The betrayal pressed down on him, a weight that stole air from his lungs. He kept replaying moments. Claire's laugh at their anniversary dinner, the way she had held Sophia's hand crossing the street, the look in her eyes when she once told him she couldn't imagine life without him. All of it now carried a poison, a hidden rot. And yet, in the quiet, another voice nagged at him. Was it me? Did I fail her somehow? He shook his head hard, refusing to let that thought take root. Weak men blamed themselves for other people's lies. Bradley Turner wasn't weak. Still, the doubt gnawed. He was a husband, a father, a provider. He had worked overtime shifts, missed fishing trips with buddies, and fixed leaky pipes at midnight to hold this house together. And now what? It had all been treated like background noise while she dressed herself up for another man. By 3 in the morning, Bradley knew sleep wasn't coming. He sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the faint glow of dawn starting to bleed into the edges of the curtains. His eyes were dry, not from tears, he hadn't shed any, but from staring too long into the dark. When the first rays of sunlight reached the living room floor, Bradley felt something settle in him. Nothing would ever be the same again. But if Claire thought she had broken him, she was dead wrong. The betrayal didn't make him smaller. It was shaping him into something harder, sharper. He didn't know the full path yet, but one thing was clear. The clock had started. The next morning, Bradley moved through the kitchen like he always did. Coffee brewing, skillet heating for eggs and bacon. To anyone else, it looked like routine. Inside, though, he felt like a man balancing on a cracked beam. Every sound, every glance carried weight. Claire came downstairs a little later, already dressed sharper than usual. A tailored blouse, a skirt that belonged more in a magazine spread than at a board meeting, perfume hanging in the air like a flag of intent. She moved quickly, heels clicking across the floor, her phone clutched tight. "Morning," she said, her tone casual, almost chipper. Bradley poured himself a cup of coffee, hiding the way his jaw flexed. "Morning." She rummaged through her purse at the counter, pulling out files, her laptop, a fresh tube of lipstick. Bradley watched her in the reflection of the window over the sink. Every detail screamed preparation, not for a meeting but for him. Derek Holloway. The name sat like a live grenade in his chest. "You've got a big one today?" he asked, voice steady, masking the storm beneath. She smiled without looking up. "Yeah, just a board meeting. Derek wants us to finalize the budget presentation before the quarterly call." The name slipped out so smooth, so thoughtless, it was almost like she wanted him to hear it. Bradley felt it slam into him, but he didn't move, didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of coffee, staring into the dark liquid, steady as stone. Derek, huh? His voice came out even neutral, like he was just making conversation. Claire froze just long enough for him to notice. Then she recovered, shoving papers into her bag. Yeah, Derek Holloway. You met him once at the Christmas party. He's sharp. The kind of guy this company needs. Bradley let a small grunt pass for agreement. Inside, though, it was on fire. Her lover's name now sat in their kitchen, spoken in the same tone she once used for family friends. Guess it's good you've got someone like that keeping you on track, he said dry. She looked at him then, searching his face for a flicker of suspicion. He gave her nothing, just a calm, unreadable mask. It was the same expression he'd used back in his army days when things got dicey. Never show your hand. She kissed his cheek on her way out, the scent of her perfume trailing behind her like smoke after a gunshot. Don't wait up. Might be a late one. The door shut, and Bradley stood still in the quiet, staring at the place where she'd been. He set his mug down carefully, then walked back to the kitchen table where the laptop still sat. He didn't open it. Not yet. He didn't need to. He already had what he needed. Confirmation straight from her mouth. Instead, he pulled a small notebook from the drawer and wrote one word in block letters. Derek. Under it, he jotted the date, the time, and what she had said. His training kicked in. Not the emotional husband, but the soldier who knew how to gather intel, to observe, to wait. For the next several days, Bradley became an invisible man in his own home. He smiled when he needed to, nodded at her excuses, and played the part of the distracted husband. But behind that mask, he was documenting everything. Every late-night meeting, every change in her routine, every receipt that didn't match the story. He checked mileage on her car, noted the perfumes she cycled through, even noticed how she suddenly guarded her phone like it held state secrets. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was for a purpose. Controlled. Calculated. Tyler and Sophia noticed little. He made sure of that. Bradley cooked dinners, drove them to practice, and kept their world as stable as possible. They didn't need to see the storm yet. At night, when Claire slept with her phone clutched under her pillow, Bradley lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The temptation to snatch it, to scroll through every filthy detail, burned like acid. But he resisted. He already had enough. Every man's instinct was to lash out, to blow the whole thing open. But Bradley Turner wasn't every man. He knew the difference between rage that wasted itself and anger that built into something unstoppable. One evening, while Claire stood at the mirror applying makeup for another so-called meeting, she hummed to herself. The sound grated at him. Bradley leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You've been working a lot with Derek lately. She glanced at him, lipstick paused halfway. Yeah. Why? It just seems like you say his name more than your boss's. For the briefest second, panic flickered in her eyes. Then she forced a laugh. Well, he's the one I deal with most. Don't overthink it. Bradley smiled. A cold, thin curve of the lips. I wouldn't dream of it. He walked away before she could reply, but inside, his resolve tightened further. She could lie all she wanted. Her words were already betraying her, even without the photos and messages. The trap was closing, and Claire was too blind to see it. Bradley had rehearsed it in his head 100 times. What he'd say, how he'd say it. But when the moment came, there was no script. There was only the weight of truth and the steel in his chest. It was late evening when he finally chose to strike. The kids were upstairs doing homework, the hum of Sophia's music faint through the ceiling. Claire was at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, flipping through her phone and smiling to herself. The sight alone was enough to light the fuse. Bradley sat down across from her, silent at first. The chair creaked under his weight. She looked up, startled by his stare. What? She asked, half defensive, half annoyed. He folded his hands on the table, his knuckles tight. I know about Derek. The wine glass froze halfway to her lips. For a second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then she set the glass down slowly, lips parting to form some excuse. Bradley cut her off. His voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. Don't bother lying. I've read the messages. I've seen the photos, the hotel reservations. I know exactly what's been going on. Her face was drained of color. The mask she'd worn for weeks, maybe months, cracked in an instant. Bradley, you what? His eyes bore into hers. You accidentally fell into another man's bed? You accidentally told him you couldn't wait to see him again? Don't insult me any more than you already have. Her shoulders slumped, the fight leaking out of her before it even began. Tears welled up, and she reached for his hand across the table. He pulled his back before she could touch him. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. I was lonely. I felt invisible. Derek made me feel wanted again. Excited. Alive. It wasn't about you. It was about me needing. Bradley slammed his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the wineglass. His voice stayed low, but the fury in it was unmistakable. Don't you dare dress this up as loneliness or excitement. You had a husband. You had a family. You had everything you needed, and you chose to spit on it. Her tears broke free, running down her cheeks. Please, just listen. I've listened enough, he said, cutting her off cold. I've listened to your excuses, your lies, your late-night stories about board meetings that never happened. And now I've listened to your confession. That's all I need. She stared at him, her mascara beginning to smear. What are you going to do? Bradley pushed his chair back, the scrape against the tile loud in the quiet kitchen. He stood, towering over her, and pointed toward the ceiling where their kids sat in their rooms, blissfully unaware. I'm going to protect them. That's my job now. Not you. Not us. Them. He walked past her, heading upstairs. In the bedroom, he pulled a suitcase from the closet and began packing. Jeans, shirts, socks, boots. Essentials only. Claire followed him, her voice cracking. Bradley, please don't go like this. We can fix it. We can talk to someone. Therapy, counseling. He zipped the bag and swung it off the bed. You broke it. You don't fix what's been shattered beyond repair. She grabbed his arm, desperation spilling out of her. What about the kids? What do I tell them? He looked down at her hand on his arm until she let go. Then he met her eyes with a cold, steady stare. Tell them whatever you want, but someday they'll see the truth. And when they do, they'll know who stood tall and who crumbled. Claire's sobs filled the room, but Bradley didn't flinch. He walked downstairs, bag slung over his shoulder. He paused at the bottom step, looking toward the family photos lining the wall one last time. Then he turned and left, the front door closing behind him with finality. The night air hit him like a slap, cool and sharp. He stood on the porch for a moment, breathing it in, steadying himself. He wasn't running away. He wasn't defeated. He was leaving because staying meant dying slowly under the same roof as betrayal. Bradley Turner wasn't built to live like that. The neon vacancy sign outside the roadside motel buzzed like an old hornet's nest. Bradley tossed his duffel on the faded carpet, shut the door behind him, and sank into the single chair by the window. The room smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke, but it was quiet, and that was enough. For days passed like that, nights staring at cracked ceiling tiles, mornings with bitter coffee from the lobby, afternoons pacing the room like a caged animal. The world outside went on as usual, but inside that motel, Bradley turned his marriage over in his mind like a knife he couldn't stop examining. He thought of the years, the sacrifices, the extra shifts he'd pulled so Claire could cut her hours when the kids were small. The vacations he planned, the anniversaries he remembered. The roof he'd replaced himself when the storm had peeled it back like paper. None of it had been enough to stop her from running into another man's arms. At night, he called Tyler and Sophia. His voice stayed steady, cheerful even. I'm on a work trip, he told them. Be good for your mom. He made sure they heard nothing in his tone that would tip them off. Their innocence was the last thing he had left, and he'd protect it as long as he could. But when he hung up, the silence swallowed him again. And in that silence, clarity began to form. Bradley realized he couldn't act on impulse. He'd seen men in the army destroy themselves by letting anger steer the wheel. Rage was fire, you had to contain it or it burned everything you cared about. His duty now wasn't just to himself. It was to Tyler and Sophia. They needed a father who wouldn't collapse, who wouldn't drown them in the wreckage of betrayal. On the third night, he walked out into the parking lot, breathing in the desert air. The horizon stretched wide, endless, indifferent. For the first time in days, his mind felt sharper. Pain hadn't killed him. It had carved him into something harder. By the fourth day, he knew. He couldn't undo what Claire had done, and he couldn't erase Derek Holloway from existence with his fists. Though God knew the thought lingered. But there were other ways. Cleaner. Lasting. Bradley packed his bag again. Not with the despair of the night he left, but with a quiet resolve. He wasn't going home to the same life or the same man. He was going back with a plan. One that wouldn't just protect his kids but set things right in a way Claire and Derek wouldn't see coming. When he pulled out of the motel lot, the red neon fading in his rearview, Bradley felt something he hadn't since the night he opened that laptop. Control. When Bradley pulled back into the driveway, the house looked the same from the outside. Same porch light, same wind chime swaying in the breeze, but he knew better. Inside, nothing was the same. Claire was gone 2 days later, her belongings packed into boxes that rattled with haste. They spoke little, just enough to confirm arrangements for the kids. She didn't fight for custody, didn't argue about who stayed in the house. Maybe guilt made her retreat quickly, or maybe she just wanted to chase Derek without baggage. Either way, Bradley didn't stop her. Tyler and Sophia stayed. That was what mattered. He held his kids close, told them life would go on, and meant it. But once they were settled, once the routine of dinners and carpools resumed, the silence of the evenings returned, and with it, Bradley's anger sharpened and waited. Walking away wasn't enough. Claire had chosen her path, but Derek Holloway had stepped into his house, into his family's life, and treated it like a playground. Bradley's gut told him Derek wasn't just a homewrecker. He was a predator in more ways than one. Men like that always had more skeletons hiding in their closets. That's when Bradley called Marcus Dean. Marcus had been his squad mate back in Iraq, the kind of man who never needed a second command. After the army, Marcus built a life as a private investigator, small-time jobs mostly, but he still had the instincts of a soldier. When Bradley explained the situation, Marcus didn't waste time with pity. "You want dirt," Marcus said on the phone, his voice gravelly. "Then we dig." They met at a quiet diner on the edge of town. Bradley laid it out. The affair, the name, the hotel reservations, everything. Marcus listened, chewing on a toothpick, his eyes narrowing at the mention of Derek Holloway's business ventures. "Funny thing," Marcus muttered, flipping open a battered notebook. "Name rings a bell. I think this guy's been in the papers before, always smiling, always shaking hands, but whispers about shady deals. Wouldn't surprise me if he's more of an artist than an entrepreneur." Bradley leaned in, his voice low. "Find out. Whatever he's hiding, I want it brought into the light. Not a bar fight, not a fist in his jaw. I want him ruined the right way." Marcus grinned, the kind of grin soldiers wore before a mission. "Now you're speaking my language." The weeks that followed turned Bradley's evenings into reconnaissance operations. While his kids worked on homework, he pored over the files Marcus collected. Bank statements that didn't add up. Shell companies registered in offshore accounts. Contracts that looked legitimate until you traced the signatures. Derek Holloway was building an empire of sand, propped up by fraud and arrogance. Marcus handled the legwork, tailing Derek to meetings, snapping photos of shady handshakes in back rooms, coaxing information out of people who didn't even realize they were talking. Bradley, steady as ever, organized it all. He built a binder, each section carefully labeled, every receipt and statement cataloged like evidence for trial. It was slow, deliberate work, but it gave Bradley something he hadn't had since that night in the kitchen. Purpose. His anger wasn't burning him alive anymore. It was fuel. Every lie he uncovered, every scam Derek had run, felt like one more step toward justice. One evening, Marcus slid a folder across the diner table, his eyes sharp. "This is the nail, Brad. The IRS is gonna love it." Inside was proof Derek had been funneling money through a fake charity, pocketing donations under the guise of helping veterans. Bradley's jaw tightened at the irony. A man dishonoring soldiers while sneaking into his marriage bed. There was no punishment strong enough. Bradley closed the folder and nodded once. "We're done gathering. Time to strike." Marcus raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To justice served cold. Bradley didn't smile. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. The binder sat heavy on Bradley's lap as he waited in his truck, parked in the far corner of the post office lot. Inside it wasn't just paper. It was the weight of months of quiet fury, sharpened into evidence. Contracts, bank records, offshore accounts, and the final dagger. The fake veterans charity. He didn't take it to Claire. He didn't take it to Derek's office with a threat. That would have been reckless, beneath him. No, Bradley slipped it into an anonymous package, addressed it to the regional office of the IRS. No return name, no fingerprints. Just the truth wrapped in brown paper. When the clerk stamped it and slid it into the outgoing bin, Bradley walked out with the calm of a man who just pulled a trigger and already knew where the bullet would land. Then he waited. Weeks passed. He drove Tyler to football practice, cheered for Sophia at her school play, grilled burgers on the back patio while the neighbors waved over the fence. Life settled into a rhythm again, and on the surface, he was just another father holding the line. But every time his phone buzzed, every time Marcus's name appeared on the screen, Bradley felt the coil of anticipation. It was on a Wednesday morning, the sky just starting to lighten, when Marcus finally called. "It's happening," he said, voice steady. "Federal boys are swarming Holloway's office right now. Boxes, computers, files, the whole 9 yards. Bradley pulled his truck to the side of the road, gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. For a moment, he just listened, to the traffic rushing past, to Marcus breathing on the line, to the silence of his own heart finally loosening. "Good," he said. Just one word, but it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every page of betrayal. 2 days later, the news broke. Bradley stood at the kitchen counter, coffee mug in hand, watching the television as Derek Holloway's face filled the screen. A local anchor's voice reported the charges: tax evasion, wire fraud, misuse of charitable funds. Video rolled of agents leading Derek out in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his smug grin replaced with hollow-eyed panic. Bradley didn't smile. Justice wasn't about joy. It was about balance being restored. Claire called that night. Her voice trembled through the voicemail. "Bradley, I heard about Derek. Oh my God. I don't even know what to say. Please, can we talk?" He listened once, then deleted it. 2 days later, another call, then a text, then another. Apologies, excuses, attempts to claw back into the life she'd tossed aside. Bradley read them, not with temptation, but with the cold certainty of a man who knew exactly where he stood. He deleted every message, leaving her words to vanish like smoke. He never told Tyler or Sophia. To them, Derek Holloway was just a name in the news, another fallen businessman. They didn't need to know their father had loaded the bullet that dropped him. What mattered was that their world stayed steady. The roof was solid. The meals were cooked. Their father was still there, stronger than ever. Marcus met him at the diner a week later, sliding into the booth with a grin. "You did it, Brad. Holloway's finished. He'll be lucky if he sees daylight in the next 20 years. Bradley sipped his coffee, eyes steady. "We did it. But don't make a hero out of me. I just put things back where they belonged." Marcus chuckled. "Call it whatever you want. But you took him down without ever raising your voice. That's something." Bradley looked out the window at the fading sun, its light spilling across the highway. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Justice had been served, not loud, not messy, but cold, precise, and final. The weeks after Derek Holloway's fall passed quietly, almost anticlimactic compared to the storm that had preceded them. No more late-night pacing, no more secrets rattling in Bradley's chest. The house was different now. Lighter, though it bore the scars of what had happened. Claire's absence left empty spaces, but Bradley didn't let them stay hollow. He and the kids filled them with new traditions. On a Saturday morning, Bradley pulled out paint cans from the garage. "We're changing this place up," he told Tyler and Sophia. "Fresh start. New colors." The three of them spent the whole weekend splattering paint across the living room walls, Sophia laughing as she dabbed her dad's shirt with a roller, Tyler shaking his head like he was too old for games but unable to hide his grin. By Sunday night, the room glowed with warm tones, the air filled with the smell of fresh beginnings. Dinners became more than meals. They became anchors. Tyler cracking jokes about school, Sophia telling stories about friends, Bradley listening, guiding, sometimes just letting the noise fill the silence that used to echo with betrayal. He cooked more, experimented even, and the kids teased him when the smoke alarm went off once. They were healing together one evening at a time. But it was the little moments that struck Bradley hardest. Like when Sophia left her school essay on the counter one morning, her handwriting neat and careful. "My dad is stronger than a superhero because he doesn't need powers to hold our family together." Bradley read it twice, his throat tightening. He folded the paper gently and tucked it into his wallet. Tyler, too, had his moment. One evening after football practice, riding home in the truck, he stared out the window before speaking. "Dad, I know things are different now, but I just want you to know. I want to live like you, steady, not backing down, even when things get rough." Bradley kept his eyes on the road, his hands firm on the wheel, but inside, something fierce and proud rose up. He didn't need to answer with a speech. He just reached over and clapped his son's shoulder, the gesture saying everything. At night, when the kids were asleep, Bradley sometimes sat on the back porch, a cold beer in hand, watching the stars scatter across the sky. The anger that once burned like fire in his gut had cooled into something stronger. Resolve. He hadn't begged Claire back. He hadn't swung a fist or drowned in self-pity. He had stood tall, made his move, and protected what mattered most. His true legacy wasn't in the revenge against Derek Holloway, though that chapter would always satisfy him in a quiet way. His legacy was in the way Tyler and Sophia looked at him now, with trust, with pride, with a sense that their father was unshakable. The betrayal had tried to break him. Instead, it had shaped him. Bradley finished his beer, set the empty bottle down, and leaned back in the chair. Tomorrow would bring carpools, bills, maybe a leaky faucet to fix. Nothing glamorous, but it was his life, his family, and his strength that carried it. For a man like Bradley Turner, that was more than enough.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.